So let's start this. Rob Miller, welcome to the podcast. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. So for those that don't know you and don't know me, we served together at First Anglico.
Yes.
But you had been, and prior to that, like well over 20 years. So you've kind of been around the block a little bit. Fire support. You've seen kind of all sides of fire support from, being a junior enlisted guy up to like seeing the higher level decision making stuff. So, I wanted to have a discussion with you and see what you hear about your career one, and we could kind of talk about the evolution of fire support. I am interested though because we are friends on Facebook, and I see some of your posts. When you were a kid, did you grew up overseas?
Yes.
Did you, go ahead.
Well, that's kind of like the trade in. I am from Austin, Texas. That was where my parents retired, and it was eventually the point at which I had a permanent address and could say, hey, I voted there, I lived there. It's the first permanent address I had for more than 3 years. I grew up in the State Department. I was born in Frankfurt, Germany, went to Italy, South America, Iran, Lesotho, Africa, Saudi Arabia. I went to boarding school for England for 2 years, and then I graduated from high school in Turkey. I was always kind of conditioned and socialized around the Marine Corps because I saw the embassy guards. And, right from that point on, I was kind of hooked. And invariably, that would be the service that I would go to. And that was the single service that I became acclimated to, and the only one I wanted to join. So I was kind of indoctrinated at an early age.
That's pretty wild. So you grew up basically all around the world, traveling around.
Yes.
Your parents were both your parents involved in the State Department?
Yes. So they were both involved in the State Department. And like I said, I went to college in 2 years in New Mexico. Then I joined the Marine Corps. And then I finished college in Florida, kind of bummed around. And then I had an opportunity to come back on active duty. And that's when I did. First, it was like ADOS, ADSW back in the days, active duty work. So I did that for about 2 years. And then I augmented eventually back to active duty. But yes, I grew up overseas pretty much my entire first 18 years of my life. I'd never lived in the United States.
That's crazy. What was, as a kid growing up, I mean, that's such a different like experience that almost any other kid or person really, gets. So, I've talked about on the podcast a couple times about how members of the military would be great for like running in politics and stuff like that, just because they get an exposure to different cultures, different countries, different regional cultures within the United States, because we're all massed together and stuff like that. How do you think living around the world kind of affected you? I mean, because you lived in like Iran. What was it like living in Iran,
So I was there before the Iranian Revolution. So it was very different. There was very a pro-Shah atmosphere and stuff like that. But then about 3-4 years later, things started to go very wrong. And then I also grew up with friends who lived there right during the revolution and actually escaped the revolution and all of its goings on. There was the Iranian hostage crisis that affected us and so many people in the State Department. But then also the other thing to remember was there were still Americans there during that hostage crisis, and the Iranian Islamic Guard guarded a lot of these Americans for fear that there'd be physical reprisals because of the anti-Americanness. If you go to the Tehran American High School webpage, they actually show guys like in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard guarding American houses and people for fear that there would be reprisals. So you glean into a very cultural perspective, like countries and places. It affected me in the sense when Lance Corporal was telling me when we invaded Kuwait about showing the bottoms of my feet. And, this was something about a Muslim culture. And I said, hey, stop, Lance Corporal. That's totally wrong. Where did you get that from? What's on the slide? And stuff like that. So, in the end of the day, I'd pretty much been everywhere the Marine Corps could go. But now it was just nice. And one of the great things about the Marine Corps is to see all of America, which I love, and then all the world I haven't seen. And that was pretty exciting. It was really, really good from that perspective.
All right, so the last part you broke up there, it sounded like you said that the best part, or you got to see with the Marine Corps, you got to see like the entire country and different things,
Yes.
and it changed your perspective. Yeah.
Yes, my parents were always really good about, we used to have to come home in the State Department every 3 years for 30 days of what was called home leave. So you became reacclimated to the United States and the American way of life. So I went up and down the East Coast, but then I'd never seen a lot of the spaces in between. And then of course the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, the Marine Corps kind of sent me to all these places that I'd never been, and I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. So yeah, I always liked the travel.
Coming back to the U.S., were you? I mean, because you've been exposed to so many different other cultures and ways of life and government and stuff like that. Does it? I don't know. What is your thoughts on the American way of life? You know, because you've seen so many other ways that it's done. Do you think we do it pretty well over here? You know, you think our government overall is pretty good? Like,
yes, yeah. The great thing about that is there's always a quality of life here that is remarkable, and we take it for granted. That you have to realize too is that when I was growing up as a kid, there was still the Soviet Union, still the Eastern Bloc. You know, 60% of the world lived in countries that were not democratic and not very favorable to the United States.
mm-hmm.
Like I said, my father was eventually stationed in Hungary during the Cold War, and then the wall came down, and then there was just different perspectives. Again, the Eastern Bloc countries were all geared and metered towards the Soviet Union, but there was always a hate and distrust for them. And I gleaned that just by going there and seeing people and how they felt. I mean, they wouldn't even talk to you because you're a Westerner, and they would just look at you and then look away. And then you just kind of walk down the streets, and then the wall came down, and then everybody was like, oh, glasnost, perestroika, all these great things. And then we started to know, like, hey, the different realities of the different countries around the world. So that's like the perspective I have, and still the perspective I have today.
How was boarding school? 2 years of an English boarding school. My only experience with that is seeing it on TV and how it can look kind of miserable.
So it was an all boys school. It was in Orwell Park. It was called Ipswich, and they still had corporal punishment. So 6 of the best, you know, for not doing well in schools, misconduct or anything like that. But then, you know, making sure your uniforms are straight and ironed, your shoes are polished, your hair is combed, you know, make sure you're ready for anything and everything. So, I mean, it was kind of a military way of life, but it also led you to be successful for the rest of your life. So, I mean, my parents were living in Saudi, so I would get on the plane by myself. You know, it was like kind of like getting on the train at Harry Potter kind of, and then going to the airport in Heathrow, and then me and my sister would get on a plane in Heathrow and then go back directly to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
What a weird thing. And this is pre-cell phone, so it's not like you're keeping in touch with your families along the way. Like, it's just like, hey, I'll see you when you get here. You know?
Yeah, so it was a letter through the APO, and hey, this is your flight, this is your time, here's your ticket, you know, and it was the old hand tickets, you know, so it was written out. And then I just knew, hey, I had to pay this much money to get on the train and stuff like that. So I was about 11 or 12. Sometimes we had some friends from England help us get there, but for the most part, it was by ourselves. And then getting on the plane for about a 7-hour plane ride to Riyadh, and then getting off. And so now you were in a cold, wet, rainy place, and now you went to a place that literally was 90 degrees. And then everything was brown. So
yeah, for sure.
It was different.
Having that kind of self-sufficiency pushed into you at a young age has got to be frustrating when you see other people that aren't like that. You know, where you're like, come on, man. Like, are you helpless? Like, can you not move from one point to the other without someone guiding you? Like, can you not make this happen?
Yes, it was funny. This goes back to a story. When I was in the MEU, I sat next to the air officer, and then we would help people like travel to and from the AO. You know, we'd go across the Transland, and then we'd get to Rota, and they're like, hey, how do I get to Brussels this shape? And I was like, well, you can either fly or you can get on the train. Oh, get on the train? Oh, I was like, yeah, the trains are pretty efficient here. Hey, have you traveled in Europe? And I was like, yeah, this is really easy, guys. You know, so from that perspective, you know, it was funny because the air officer all of a sudden became the default travel agency.
Yeah.
You know, you're supposed to book your flight. Would you like a window or an aisle? Would you like a vegetarian meal or something like that? You know, it was just silly stuff. It was funny and comical. to watch, and these guys were grown men trying to get them in or around the AO and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's something you just don't know, It's like one of those things,
Yeah.
like, until you've traveled abroad, unless you've had that experience, it's like, holy shit, I'm just going to go through this other country? Like, how do I do that? It seems like I don't know, for some people, I guess, who've never left the United States, it seems kind of weird, but I guess when you've flown all over the place and everything, it's not that big of a deal. You talk about how strict they were in school and stuff, and wearing uniforms and things like that. I never went to a school, like a private school, where you had to wear uniforms. And when I lived in Tennessee, my middle school was brand new. When I was getting ready to go to that middle school, it was the first year it was open, and they had like a dress code where you had to wear like slacks, either like hunter green, it was like hunter green, navy blue, or khaki slacks, a belt, shirt tucked in with a collar, and it had like 3 different colors of shirts you could wear also. But it was a public school, and people were pretty outraged about it. And then I went from that school to a different school, which didn't have that, and people are showing up in sweatpants and all bummed out. And that's how, like, I see my kid goes to school, and he's like, yeah, everyone just wears gym shorts and whatever all day. And I'm like, dude, you can't look like a bum whenever you're leaving the house, It's just like what you're describing is just like a completely different world, you know what I'm saying, compared to like American kids' education is just like I don't know, it's kind of depressing when I send my own kid out there and I'm like, man, I hope they're not fucking you up, I'm over here like trying to back teach them stuff that I think's important, like real stuff and history and science and stuff that I think he should see. But yeah, I don't know, what's your take on the education system compared to what you went through as a kid?
So some ways you were forward, and then coming back to the American education system. So like I went to the 8th grade in Turkey, and then some ways I was ahead, and then some ways I was behind, and then doing that. And it was funny because there was another kid in our high school. He was from India, so he used to wear his school uniform to school, and everybody's like, "Wait, where'd you get that from? Where's the gray slacks and the white shirt?" And I was laughing at him because they were all like, hey, a standard school uniform in India.
Yeah.
And it was so when I came to the high school in Turkey, we also had dress codes. You couldn't wear shorts because we were essentially in a Muslim country. It was kind of one of those provocative things that if you saw something or heard something, somebody might be offended. I think one time I was in an incident in a taxi cab when I was wearing shorts, and the taxi cab driver just browbeated me. I would later find out that the guy was like an Iranian from Iran and stuff like that. So, wearing shorts in Turkey wasn't like really cool. You could do it at the beach. Probably can do it now because it's a little different, but back then you couldn't. So we did have a dress code when I went there, but jeans, t-shirt, appropriate shirt was always appropriate.
That's one of those weird things when you go to like a Muslim country. There's like those weird, you do have to think about what you're wearing, and especially females, because it's a big deal. Like it's a big deal in some of those cultures.
Yeah, it's had another incident when I was a kid too. I went to the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, and I was wearing shorts, and I was like, oh, okay, I won't go into the mosque and stuff like that. So somebody saw me at the front door, and they made me wear a dress, and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to come in today. And they go, hey, why did you want to come? This is a great tour. And then they threw a dress on me and dragged me through the mosque and saying, oh, this is this. So there was times that, you had to be polite, respectful. And that was the time that I was trying to do that. And at the same time, I literally had 5 guys around me just arguing with me because I wouldn't wear the dress. And I said, it's not that I don't want to wear it. I was like, I will come back another day when I'm dressed in trousers, and I'll go home. But yeah, they wouldn't accept that. They threw the dress on me and dragged me through the mosque and gave me their own personal tour.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end, I learned a lot, but it was really, browbeating in your face. You will learn this, you will learn that. It was kind of funny. Mm-hmm. Looking back at it now, it's kind of funny, but during the time, I was like, wow, this is kind of scary.
Did you have any aspirations to do anything else, or were you just dead set on the military, on joining?
I was dead set on the military. My parents were like, well, if that's what you want to do, you got to do it. So yeah, I was dead set on it. I was also affected too by Vietnam. We used to get Newsweek, Time, and Life magazine when I was growing up as a kid, and just all the pictures and stuff like that. And then, just some of the pictures were kind of looking back at it now as an adult. they're kind of horrifying, But back then I was a kid. I was like, wow, man, cool. You're in the military. You're out there, in the jungle with your weapon, and you and your buds are, patrolling around. I thought that was what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's different once you finally get there, and you're like, man, those dudes are miserable. You know, you see those videos of the recon guys coming up out of the water on the beach or whatever, and it's like that dude's probably freezing. He's pissed in his wetsuit. Like, he's been out since 02 or whatever. Like, that dude's kind of miserable right now. It's cool stuff. Like, we end up getting to do some cool stuff, but there's a lot of misery that comes along with that cool stuff. So, when you enlisted, what was it like? Where did you enlist out of? You said, did you enlist out of Austin?
Las Cruces, New Mexico.
Okay.
Originally joined the reserves. I was motor T. And then
I didn't know that.
So then I transitioned to 061 when I finished off school in Florida. And then I augmented to active duty. Motor T school was very different than probably when you went through. We had like a first echelon mechanics course we had to give as well. Turn bolts, train,
Were you an operator or a mechanic?
I was an operator,
but
they also gave us a crash course mechanic, and then there were those two things were interchangeable. Also, too, before that, the Marine Corps used to do third echelon maintenance, meaning they used to go to the FSG, and they would take the whole truck apart and put it back together and then fix it. And we don't do that anymore. Now we do that all through contracting.
Yeah, a lot of that is, yeah.
So, like I said, I went to New Mexico Military Institute in Roswell, New Mexico. So again, I finished up my associates there, and then I finished up at University of South Florida. I was 28. I was too old to go to OCS. So I was like, I augmented a couple times for active duty. I thought, oh, this is pretty cool. And then I was like, oh, okay. So then the war on terrorism started, and then I came full time.
Was there any kind of aspirations to become an officer? Because that was going to be my question. Like, if you went to college, why didn't you just go ahead and become an officer?
I tried. Like I said, I
just missed the cutoff, huh?
I just missed the cutoff. And like I said, at 1995, they weren't taking guys who were 28 years old. And then the other part about it, too, is I actually had a ship date in the spring. But college algebra, I'd taken it at New Mexico, but they said, oh, you have to take it from a Florida school. So I always tell my Marines and everybody else, hey, man, look at your transcripts. Some may transfer, some may not. Please do that, because if you go to a school that requires certain credits being done there in that school or in that department, you're going to get shortchanged, and you're going to find out the hard way when you think you're going to graduate this day and you wind up saying, oh, I have to stay another semester to take another course.
For
so
sure.
That's what I wound up doing, and they just wouldn't run me.
Yeah.
So
I had to. So that's a good point. You know, when I was taking, classes, when I decided I'm getting out, I was like, all right, I need to really lean into taking college classes because it's going on the MU. So I was like, I'm going to have plenty of time to take classes, so I might as well lean into it. And at the time, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do when I got out. So I was like, well, I'll just take some general education classes. But I also want to make sure they're going to transfer, because we all know there's a lot of online schools that are just garbage, that are just bullshit. It's check the box, and then you get a degree, and you really don't have to do any work. And you know what? A lot of those schools aren't, their credits aren't going to transfer to a legitimate university if that's your end state. So what I did personally is I was still in San Diego, so I was like, what school here is probably one of the top schools? So I looked up USC. And then I looked up their, it's called the Articulation Agreement with Central Texas College, which is a school I signed up with on base at Camp Pendleton. And I only took classes that was on USC's Articulation Agreement, because I was like, if USC will accept it as a class and accept those credits, then I guarantee any other school in California and many other places are also going to accept it. So that's definitely a good point to make, because there's a lot of people that get out and figure that out. Like, oh man, I took these classes from this trash school just to get them done, and now I realize that, you know, other people realize they're trash as well, and they're not going to accept those credits. So when you got in, you know, when you decided to go active duty, what year was that?
It's about 2001, right after September 11th. So that was kind of the decision point. And then my parents were huge in influence, like, hey man, you need a job, you need something you can stick to. You know, this bohemian lifestyle, traveling around and stuff like that. I just can't keep doing it. So they're a big influence on me. And then that was kind of the decision point. And then I realized, hey, this is really important. This is why we're here. Because you have to realize, too, is like it was the post-Cold War era. So, the economy was really good. They got rid of a lot of people in 91 and 92. And then in the mid 90s, a lot of people were just getting out after 10 years, which was something that was unheard of and unprecedented. Like, hey, you want to get that retirement? And they're like, no, I've got another opportunity to go someplace else. And so that was kind of where I was at. But then, we watched the towers come down. And then that was like, hey, we have a purpose. We have a function. We have something to do. We need to do the job. And it was always about the service. It was never predicated on my socioeconomic background, as they always say, is the kind of mindless cliche, that it wasn't because my parents left my bags at the door, but because of the service, because of, at the end of the day, I didn't want to be that guy who said, hey, where were you during the war? And I was like, oh, I was at home, used to see all those, people who in the 70s were like, yeah, we got out of the military. We dodged the draft or something like that. So there was always a real sense of urgency and patriotism to join the military and to go do your country's bidding when you were asked, regardless of what it was. So if, September 11th happened and I was cleaning, pans in the chow hall for 4 years and got out and never saw combat, that was just as important as I think as somebody who went to the front.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people that don't realize that it's hard for them to digest that. You know what I'm saying? They have a bad taste in their mouth about their service if they didn't get to deploy or something like that.
Yeah, don't when you wish like that, you'll get what you wish for, and it's not what you always wish for. So just be careful, okay? And service is service. It's important. And oh, by the way, some of us may get to see combat, and a lot of people won't. And like I said, at the end of the day, for every one person that's in the field actually in a combat MOS, it takes like 5 to 6 guys to support him, So that's critical.
Yeah, for sure. You got to get ammo somehow. You got to get chow somehow. You got to get, medevac somehow in those cases. You got to get fire support somehow. Yeah, for sure. Was that a big thing at the time? Was after September 11th, were there a lot of reservists trying to go active duty to, like, hey, this is my time to get in the game?
So one of the things they did was they activated all the units in New York and stuff like that, and prospects of going to Afghanistan. But if you remember the history of Afghanistan, it fell quite easily. It was like 45 days and the Taliban was gone. But they activated a lot of people and stuff like that. There was also a lot of people that got activated that were previously active duty, in 91. They gave people pink slips, with 10 years of service. So they did the reserve thing for 10 years. And now they got the opportunity to finish out that 10 years. There was a lot of people who did that. But for the most part, they did activate them. And then, of course, in 2003, when we did the invasion in Iraq, that's when a lot of the units got activated. So now, we look at like all the force structure and cuts. Pretty much the active duty is interchangeable with the reserves because they're an important and integral part to the active duty and support of the active duty. You look at the Air Force and they have this many flying aircraft. Well, 2/3 of that is in the reserves and Guard.
Yeah. Air National Guard is huge in that side.
Yeah, so you have to realize that, and we talk about 1st Marine Division, 2nd Marine Division, and 3rd Marine Division. Well, guess what? You have 4th, and that's just your reinforcing. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, for sure.
It's huge.
So when you got on active duty, you had to go back. I'm assuming you went through MOS school again, right, as a lap mover.
Yes, I actually did that as a reservist. I did that in '97.
Okay.
It was kind of cool. My instructor looked at me and goes, "Hey, dude, I know you from somewhere." And I was like, "Yeah, I know you from somewhere." So he started calling out the places of all the places that he was at. And he was actually on the Shore Fire Control Party, and he was on the USS New Jersey. And it had come to Turkey, and I'd come there for a trip, and I went through a tour like kids, going through, oh, wow, just look at this ship. But he was there, so my instructor was that. So I eventually figured that out.
That's cool.
But yeah, going through MOS school was really easy because most of the stuff we had done already in Anglico. We had an ABC course at the reserves. So they pretty much socialized and conditioned you to fires. We had a lot of extra ATs to learn IFSAS, which was the predecessor to FATIDS, a lot of the computers. And then we did a lot of work with what was then the old JFO course, the Special Operations Spotters course, and then the FSCC course, Fire Support Coordination course. So, I mean, we did a lot of training at the reserves. And then, like I said, Anglico, at 4th Anglico and 3rd Anglico, there was a high tempo unit. I mean, there was a lot of motivation. Mm-hmm. Everybody was up to TOTE. Everybody jumped. We did ATs, or actually weekend drills where we jumped into Camp Lejeune, went to the CAS trainer, did a mock invasion of some, said name Island A, and then got back on a plane and jumped back into West Palm Beach. And then, hey, you're back at work or back at school, in my case, on Monday. So there was a lot of great things and a lot of fast stuff.
That's a weird lifestyle, right? In the reserves doing that, where you go from a military guy all weekend doing something crazy like jumping out of an airplane, and then the next day it's like, all right, get up and go to school and sit here and listen to the professor.
Yeah, so there was a lot of that, and like I said, it was pretty fun. And then a lot of my friends in the reserves were also in my same college, so we all knew each other. So we, drove down to West Palm Beach from Tampa together, and we did a lot of stuff. And some of those friends are now like forever friends, from college and from the reserves. Mm-hmm. I still keep in touch with them forever.
That's awesome, man. Now, when you came on active duty, what unit did you go to?
I went to. It was funny. I went to 2nd MLE. So, they had disbanded Anglico, 2nd Anglico in 97, and then 1st Anglico in 98, and they redesignated them as MLE. I think we talked about this on the phone. General Krulak still had to make more force cuts and more force reduction. He had an active duty force structure review group, and his going into it was that Anglico doesn't really do anything for the Marine Corps. And, with a stroke of a pen, essentially the 1,600 personnel, 400 civilian, and 1,100 Marines he needed to get rid of. So he got rid of half of the Marines he needed to by, just a pen stroke with MLE. So that was like 500 guys. So a lot of the 0861s went to the regiments, which they were always short of 0861s in the batteries. And then he redesignated them as MLE. The problem with that was that MLE was supposed to be a company and higher, kind of like a brigade team, and a assault sporting arms liaison team, and that they would have augments from the reserves, 4th and 3rd Anglico, because they never rolled up their flags. Mm-hmm. There was also a different pot of money, and essentially, if they did that, essentially they would have to, close the Anglicos down, and all the reservists, they would have probably had to give them a golden handshake and say bon voyage. Staff NCOs or officers, you're looking at probably 15 grand. And then some of the junior enlisted guys, you're looking at 10 grand because they couldn't drill anymore if they didn't have a place to go. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the reasons why 3rd and 4th Anglico stayed in place and they still had their jump mission. The commandant wanted to focus less on the tactical and more on the operational and cultural. So he was really inclined to have FAOs come to MLE, with language expertise and stuff like that, and kind of.
You want to explain what a FAO is, real quick, for those that don't know?
It's a foreign area officer. So you pick a region of the world, you have a language, you have a cultural, you go up to San Francisco, and you learn a language essentially, and you become a subject matter expert. Sometimes you even go to their command and staff colleges. I had a friend who went to Turkey and did the command staff college. And, he learned to speak Turkish, so he's fluently reading and writing, and he went to what their was their command and staff. So that's the type of, guys that would go there, and then they'd come back to the United States. So every time we had an exercise with Turkey, they would pull this guy. In theory, it was great, but in practicality, it didn't work. So most of the guys in MLE still had to go on the MU because there was still a requirement for that. So they're getting a lot of guys TAD, and that's kind of what my access to that was, that I went out with 2 DETs as an MLE guy, as a staff NCO for the SALT. And it was fun, but it was also kind of Like, hey, what are we actually doing out here? And it's the same problems a lot of the MUs have today. You kind of get augmented into the orbit of the command element, and next thing you know, you got 2 guys down in combat cargo, 2 guys in the chow hall, and you're sitting there in the LFOC answering the phone, and
Yep.
as a watch officer. So like, that was some things that we had to do.
That is literally it too. That was my experience of being the salt chief on my first MU. It was at least half of my job was fighting off the command element people that would want to take my guys for one task or another to go do something stupid. Well, it's like, hey man, we're planning to go forward for this operation or for this training exercise or whatever, and you're arguing with me about taking one of my guys to cook breakfast for a month. You know what I'm saying? Like, I need him off ship. I don't care. Like, this is he's not here to cook breakfast. He's here to fucking program my radios. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's that's the misery of it. It's but it has its place. There's if used right, an Anglico team on a MU is very obviously very valuable to have, and there's been a lot of Anglico teams that have gone out and done a lot of stuff off of MUs with a lot of different units. Do you think that them taking Anglico out of the active duty forces wasn't that around the same time that whole blood pin thing came out? The videos of them like pinning each other and shit?
Yeah. That video actually was originally it ran with little or no, something from the press. Anybody could see it. But then they reran it again, and then it was a high profile, and then it was kind of, everybody said, oh, Anglico went away because of that. It didn't, but that was out there. It's kind of bad because it showed Anglico in a bad light, and it wasn't even Anglico, it was air delivery. And the guy that was doing the ramrodding with the guys, he actually got court-martialed originally, and he was supposed to be out of the Marine Corps. Somehow he re-enlisted because he pulled the court-martial out of his SRB, and then he was a warrant officer. How did we get there? And then the other part about it was in about the time Charles Krulak came out with the no hazing policy. And then you didn't even look at somebody's wings. But a lot of people said that, but I don't think that was singly the single effort. I still go back to, hey, it was a cost issue. We cut all the stuff after 91, and we still needed to cut some more. Oh, by the way, now I have the battalions deploying on these MUs, and they're going to Somalia, and again and again and again. And then they're like, oh, hey, we need to get rid of Anglico. And that's why. What
were the units? So you mentioned that yesterday when we were talking on the phone. What were the units doing? I thought Somalia was like a quick in and out thing. I didn't realize this was like an ongoing. No. And when I say quick, I mean, I thought it was like a year long kind of thing that culminated with the whole Black Hawk Down thing, and we pulled people out after that. Was that not the case? Was Somalia like a rotation for a lot of MU deployments?
It was. I don't remember all of it. All I remember is that when the MU did invade, the CNN was there, and they were putting the cameras in the face because during the Gulf War they had been kept at bay, and then they'd been only fed information that the commanders wanted them to hear. So there was kind of an in-your-face. But I remember them invading literally, and them turning on their lights and it went on for about 2 or 3 years, and then finally after Black Hawk Down, the MU came in and kind of got everybody out and stuff like that. But it was kind of an in and out thing, so it lasted probably 2 to 3 years. And it was a huge cost to the government, getting those units ready to go there and stuff like that. So it was, again, out of that deployment cycle. It was kind of the precursor to PERS tempo, when we looked at how much guys were deploying and then how much time they had back home.
Okay.
So it wasn't just a single-handed, operation Black Hawk Down that we just left.
Yeah, it was an extended thing for a little while. Huh.
Yes.
Weird how people kind of forget that, When you came on active duty, what was like the tempo and attitude like in the forces, right? This is post 9/11. This is, we've already been in Afghanistan, I'm assuming by this point, and probably, that's already taken care of. So what was like your role at MLE and like what was happening there?
So essentially I was assault chief. I went out on 22 MU, and then I came back And then we were just waiting for all the guys to come. Like in 2003, we were redesignated in July, and then October, 1st Anglico was redesignated, and then we would get like one guy a week for billets, and then the TE changes, and then understanding like, hey, when you made all these changes and you had all these after actions, what was the long-term and short-term effect of those things? So it was kind of getting Anglico ready for its TE, and then finding our niche, finding our place, and then getting all of our guys. I mean, we were on the phone with the monitor like 7-8 months before we deployed to get guys, and then all of a sudden you had 3 classes that showed up of 0861s or 2531s, which are radio operators, and then looking at the TE, like, hey, where are we going? What had we done before that was successful, and then transitioning to where we are now. So we had like a hodgepodge of guys. We didn't have, specifically 0802s, which are field artillery officers. We also had tankers, infantry guys. It was good for some weapons training. But then the other problem with that was that supporting arms liaison team, or the brigade team, or the division team, some of these 0302s were kind of challenged with big comprehensive fires. Mm-hmm. And then looking at the TOTE, the infamous SAW, we had on the FIC team forever, that, was like, hey, why are we having a SAW? Well, we need that to suppress, fires if we're calling in an airstrike. Well, no, actually, that's not our job. I think having an extra radio on that guy's back is more important. And then looking at the TOTE after actions with 1st MLE, 1st Anglico, and then 2nd MLE, 2nd Anglico, and making them merge up. So that's where we were for that.
Just trying to figure everything out, right? I was talking to Ryan Stevens on the last episode, and we discussed it a little bit on the phone, but he was saying how he showed up, and he's a PFC, brand new to the fleet, so he doesn't know anything. But obviously you can get the sense that people are still trying to figure this whole thing out, and it's going to take a little bit of time to validate processes and validate how we're doing certain things, and as deployments go down, then we can go back and go, okay, well, that didn't work for that deployment, let's fix it for the next one. Is that what you were seeing a lot of? Was it just
that was a lot? It was funny. I looked back at I don't know if you have a copy. I'll probably send this to you digitally. It was like 1st MLE war and stuff like that, and how we transition, and you read it, and it's like, wow, some of the same mistakes that we made back then, and then why they got rid of Anglico were the same reasons and challenges we face now. What does the division team do in CONUS when we have 2 salts on the MEU and then 1 away training? What does our training entail? How do we command and control? And you look at one of the after actions was, hey, having the ability to do ADOCS, which is now JDOCS, the computer where all the systems fuse together and get information. We didn't have that when we were MLE. So things like that.
Were you guys also trying to like advertise your capabilities, like to let people know, like, hey, we have this unit that can do these things?
Yes. So, was trying to restore old relationships. I know in 2nd Anglico, we used to work heavily with the 82nd Airborne Division. So we were constantly going there and saying, hey, we do that. There were some old guys who knew what we did. And that was important. And then a lot of the special operations community, the Ranger battalions, also knew what we did. I argue still to this day that had we been alive and well during the initial volleys of September 11th, I don't think we would have had the problems, particularly with carrier air, that we did, in Afghanistan had Anglico been around.
What problems are you talking about?
So specifically, you remember the JDAM incident with the guys that were, Mazari Sharif initially. They had an issue with that. Telling the coordinates to the aircraft and getting the bomb off, and them dropping in the wrong place and essentially dropping on themselves.
Yeah, I remember that.
Things like that. One of our very own, Michael Spann, was in clandestine operations, and he was the guy who found Johnny Walker, and he was the guy interviewing him. Hey, you're American. and stuff like that. And he was like, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. And then at the end, when they retook the castle, he was like, hey, my name's John Walker. I'm an American,
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
having that Anglico capability was huge out there, and that's where we could have made a lot of money.
That may be something a lot of people may not realize, is that Mike Spann, the first casualty of the War on Terror, was a former 2nd Anglico guy and
Yes.
artillery officer, and then got out of the Marine Corps and went into the CIA and started
Yes.
doing their whole thing. So, pretty interesting little, factoid there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So being able to do that type of aviation assets on there and targets and understanding that whole liaison piece is huge. So, yeah, good on him.
So what was, as someone that's on the staff of this unit that's like, coming into its own again, getting more people, getting all the equipment, getting, training coming down the pipeline. And now I'm sure there's talk about a deployment coming up, because they're not going to stand up a new unit without having a deployment for them to go on, in the future. What was like the let's get ready for this deployment feeling like? How did you guys get ready for that first deployment? How did that go? And then what changes did you make afterwards?
So one of the things in 2004, we stopped sending guys on the MEU. Our CEO went to the MAF commander and said, "Hey, look, all my guys are doing there is augments to the command element in the MEU. 2005 is going to be our first deployment, and we need to go ahead and have all the company ready." At that point in time, we kind of supported Marine units, which was kind of a non-traditional relationship. 4th Anglico down in Basra, probably about 2004, did a lot of great work. And then, the enlisted controller coming to its own. I don't know if you remember, there was a battalion down there had lost their air officer and 2 FACs. Two were wounded in action, another was KIA, and 4th Anglico picked up the slack. And then the battalion commanders realized the value in having enlisted controllers and people understanding aviation and fires integration. So we went out on that thing, and I supported the BCT Mississippi National Guard for about 3 months, and then we did other operations for other people. It was a whole range of things, from supporting EOD for route clearance, and then other units that were going around clearing north of Fallujah and stuff like that. So it was fun stuff. It was always something different and a different day. So that was huge.
That's one of those cool things about an Anglico deployment, is you could get tapped to support anybody. So your role could be anything from working in a command center, approving fires over a video screen, to being on a foot patrol or a raid package with some task force unit going in to do something crazy. There's like everything in between there. Do you think that now, obviously, to support that wide range of mission sets, has to be some kind of training there. When you guys first kind of got Anglico back going again, you guys started up the ABC, the Anglico Basic Course. Correct me if I'm wrong, that was mainly to get everybody on the same page with fire support and like comms, right?
Yes. So one of the things that was great about Anglico was the fact that sergeant and below should have been indistinguishable between 0861 and 2531 at the time, which later became 0621 for the radio operator. Those should be indistinguishable. So you should know all the fires and stuff like that. One of the things that happened was we got on all the new radios, which was the 117, which was multi-band, which was a huge jump. People don't realize that, because previously we had, Pisky 5s, which were COM and UHF, satellite and UHF, and then we had the PRC 119, so it was VHF comms, and then the 113, and then the 104, which is this huge clunking HF radio. So with that 117, we could accomplish just about anything as far as like all the radios, that consonant umbrella, which is of communications, which is critical to Anglico, and people take it for granted. It's kind of the silent winner in all of this. The fire support is the fun, sexy part, but comprehensively having the communications all the way from the MEF all the way down to a FICT, that fluid communications is critical, and that's what Anglico was known for.
Yeah, for sure. I've been in a few units, and artillery and Anglico, like fire support units, are the ones that push comm training to everyone more than anybody I've seen. I've worked with infantry guys before, and it's always like, hey, where's the radio operator? I need you to program my radio. Like bring the radio operator, make sure all the radios are good to go for this upcoming whatever. Whereas like Anglico and stuff, it's like the radio operators will get the radios out, get them ready and stuff, but it's also on the JTAC and the JFO, to be able to, in the moment, fix their own radios. Because the reality is, yeah, we have firepower control teams where you have 4 or 5 guys that are fire supporters and radio operators, but a lot of times, they only need one of those dudes or maybe 2 of those dudes, and you don't always have the radio operator there with you. So it's almost like the cross training we do with medical. Because it's like, hey, every team has a corpsman, but that corpsman's not always going to be there. So we have to be self-sustaining. And that's what I really liked about Anglico, is that self-sustaining attitude. Like, hey, man, we have to know how to drive our own vehicles. We have to know how to secure our own logistics. We have to know how to get comm for ourselves. There's no one else is going to help us here. No one else, we're the guys that are supposed to come in and do the comm. So we can't be asking other people for help. So the expectation is you're going to come in here and be the best radio operator, even if you're not a radio operator, that you can be. Would you agree with that sentiment?
Yes, I would. I think the basic element is the FIC, but with that basic element, like I said, you'll go all the way up to the division team, and then to be self-supporting, self-sustaining is critical. Another story, NBC. I think when we invaded in 2003 with the Brits, we didn't have any suits, chemical suits, so we were going to have to wear British chemical suits. And then somebody heard about that, like, oh no, hey, we need to give you NBC guy. So an NBC guy came out like 6 hours before we invaded and gave us American NBC suits because they wouldn't let us or couldn't guarantee that the British suits would be adequate, which is garbage. But they were. So we transitioned from our suits, or from their suits to our suits. Again, goes back to one of the critical elements that, and the headquarters needs to realize, is every single thing we need or we need to get, we already have to have. And that, that division team for the headquarters is critical in facilitating that. And it's one of the reasons why we have an NBC guy. Guys couldn't even realize, guys were just blown away that we had a sergeant NBC guy at a company, and like, what? Why do we have that? And I'm like, hey, this is the historical precedence that was set, but we need to be able to do our own NBC. And the same time too is go out and train the teams, or hey, these are the threats. These are the things you may see. If you see this or this or this, and kind of the NBC guy gets thrown into the S3, and we'll use him once a year to get gassed, which is garbage, because he should be doing sustainment training and then looking at all the threats for any specific country, which is critical. But the biggest thing is you need to be able to do everything yourself, support and sustain, because sometimes we can't rely necessarily on our allied and coalition partners to support us. So everything from chow, water, mail, weapons maintenance, radio maintenance, and stuff like that, it needs to be all fluid, just like that umbrella of communications. And it's where the division team and headquarters team is critical. And sometimes we were under strength with rank. Hey, why does a company have 2 ammo techs? Well, if you look at the range of ammunition we could have, we go all the way from 5.56 to 155 artillery rounds, and having somebody there to go there and negotiate on our behalf at the ASP, the ammo support place, is critical. So that's the reason why we have 2 ammo techs and stuff like that, and then our embark guys and everything else in the S4.
Can you tell us about that time you got left ashore and how it was critical to be self-sustaining?
So, we got just left ashore with one of the MEUs. I won't say which MEU it was, but we got left at the beach, and we're like sitting there, and finally we got on the radio. And like I said, we always used to have standard operating procedures, and everybody was to carry 2 batteries. These batteries were to be used only in emergencies. And then we had a 104, and then we got left there. We just, no one came and picked us up. So we're at the beach, and then...
Where at?
It was in Greece.
Okay.
And we actually called up the LFOC, and they're like, what? Where you at? Say grid over. And we were just giving the grid, and then we didn't hear anything. And then finally the watch officer gets on, and then the operations officer gets on and he's like, let me understand you're here. And, so they're already 50 miles off the coast. So, and then I didn't hear anything. And then about 2:00 in the morning, he said, hey, we'll have somebody come out and pick you up. I think at that point in time, some of my FIC guys just didn't understand, hey, why we have these radios, what they're used for, having that reach back, because we talked to the MEU and they were just like, yeah, whatever, radio check, radio check, radio check. But they didn't understand, hey, we were left at the beach. And then when we made somebody realize that. And then after that, I think the two guys that, ditched their batteries realized that, hey, man, I'm going to keep those batteries at the bottom. And yes, I'm going to make sure I have comms constantly with the MEU.
Yeah, it's all those little things. It's like, hey, man, we have rules. A lot of these rules and reasons we do stuff, there's a reason behind it. There's a lot of stuff that's dumb and, there may not be a reason behind it, but a lot of like operational stuff, like why do I carry extra batteries? Why do I carry, my NVGs, even if it's daytime? Like there's a reason behind that, because it's shit has happened. Shit may happen. Shit will happen, just like guys that come in and like, they like using the tablets and stuff now. It's like, bro, what if can you still plot on a map? Cause what if that tablet fucking dies or gets shot or breaks or whatever? Like, can you still bust out your compass and your protractor and your map and kind of figure out what's going on and what you need to do that way? That was always like I don't know. That was one thing that I think we did a really good job of like reinforcing, was like brilliant in the basics. Like, hey, the minimum is you are going to understand how to get this radio back up. Either fix the crypto, figure out whatever net is supposed to be on, whatever frequency it's supposed to be on, figure out what's going on with it. But that is going to happen. Just like you're going to know how to do target location. There's no if, and, or but about it. That's your job. So at a minimum, you're going to be very good at these two things. And then after that, we'll start looking at, expanding our repertoire into medical training, into, different types of training, Hearst training, stuff like that. So, to back up, you said, you did the invasion with the Brits. Were you guys with 148 battery?
Yes. So 148 battery, again, a lot of those guys are there forever. So when they have is what the Brits call the regimental system. And essentially you go to your hometown and you join the regiment at your hometown. Okay. So that's the one that you join. So a lot of guys were at Plymouth and they were at the 148 battery. It's they are the artillery that supports the British Royal Marines. And we invaded in 2003 on March 17th, about 2 days before the war actually kicked off. And we invaded the Peninsula. It's funny because I look at like a lot of Marine Corps historical data, and it just says, oh, the Marines invaded Afwa. It doesn't give like specific, explicit 1st MLE with augments from 2nd MLE invaded with the British Royal Marine 40th and 42 Commando. And they went and consolidated all the way to Al Qut, which is an Air Force base on the western side of Iraq. So we invaded with 40th and 42 Commando, and essentially the 3rd Anglico went out with a UK armored division, and they didn't have anybody else to spare. So they called up 2nd MLE, and we had like Assault Plus with like 22 guys to support 1st MLE, and we got on the plane. It was great because we saw some friends from 1st Anglico that were still there, and friends I know now that we just kind of high-fived and went back and forth with, and that was nice. The 148 battery guys knew a lot of the Marines and would ask about, hey, where's this guy? And I was like, dude, that guy got out like 50 years ago. But they're still a Lance Corporal, and they've been at the battery forever. They've been there 10 or 15 years. So that's something most Marines can't get their arms around. It's something we tried to do once the drawdown, is try to push guys to their respective coasts. If you were from like Indiana, hey, you would go to 2nd MEF or something. They try to do that, and like people are like, no, we need a PCS every 3 years. But 148 battery was with us, and we invaded, and we kind of augmented them, and we used our radios for that constant communications umbrella that was so critical, knowing where all the forces were and stuff like that. You remember the infamous POV incident 3435, yep. And the A-10 that strafed. If you remember, hey, somebody came up on guard. It was Lightning. It was one of our teams that was actually there who said, hey, ceasefire, ceasefire. And they went back up.
Yeah, for those that may not know what we're talking about, it's an incident in Iraq where A-10s identified vehicles that they thought had rockets on top of them, but it was actually their air panels, the orange air panels, to mark them for the aircraft so that they would know that they're friendlies. They mistook those because we also need to realize this is what 2003. What do these guys were probably looking at them literally with binoculars from the cockpit, because if they had pods or systems, it would be probably shitty at that time. So there was a misidentification of forces. They didn't realize there were forces that forward, whoever the approval authority was, and then they ended up striking at least one, if not two, or multiple British vehicles. That obviously not a good incident. That's one of the incidents that I would teach in my. I taught a fratricide class to different guys, and that's one of the things I would bring up. We'd listen to the audio, we'd watch the video, and then kind of discuss what happened there and stuff like that. When you guys attached to 148 battery, was this the first time you had worked with them? Because you said they had worked with Marines in the past.
I worked with them up at Liaison. There was a huge exercise, Purple Star, in '97. So we worked up there. So again, we worked with the Royal Dutch Marines, the Norwegian Marines, and 148 Battery and the British Royal Marines. And the 82nd came out. So it was a huge exercise. It was a joint exercise that we always had with our allied coalition partners. And essentially it was that second MEF was going to stop the hordes of communism coming down through Norway. And that was what it was supposed to simulate or project power through NATO with our allied and coalition partners. And it was a fun exercise. Everybody would jump in, and we'd have a good time because seeing like what other allied coalition partners do for certain things is really awesome. And then it also reinforced all of our standard operating procedures as far as communications. Like for the Brits, their spacing on their HF radios was like 2 off of ours. So we could switch back to positions on the old dial, and then the megahertz frequency spacing would be with theirs, online with theirs. So things like that you'd figure out. Just communications, but it was still facilitated through that communications umbrella. I just cannot emphasize that enough.
Yeah.
And then having that fluid communications, it was always great for the MEF. And it's like, hey, these guys are reservists. Why do they have communications with the MEF and nobody else does? It was always a real, hey, attaboy. And that was kind of what we were known for, Hey, where everything was going down, we could still communicate. But hey, where are those lightning guys at? Hey, call them up and find out where they're at, what they're doing.
Yeah. And
they say, hey, go find this guy and give him. So, but back to your original question, 148, yes, I had worked with them in Lejeune. And then we went to England about January, about 4 or 5 days after New Year's. Got on a 727 that was run by the Navy. We flew over to Great Britain. We did some training there, and then we got aboard the HMS Ark Royal. And then we floated out to Crete. We did some training there. And then we went through the Suez, the ditch, as they call it, and then up to the Northern Arabian Gulf. And then we did some more training there in Oman. And it was fun. Like I said, it was definitely different culture and climate of training.
For sure. It is interesting working with the I can't remember the name of the exercise we did at ANGLICO with the 148 guys, but it was cool like working with them and seeing how they do fire support different. It's just the differences in how we do everything. Did you feel so when you were like tasked like, hey, we're going into an actual war now and you're getting attached to these guys, did you feel like you yourself and your guys are ready to do that task? Like this was like, okay, this is for real now. We've done a couple exercises, we've exercised our comm a little bit here and there, but now this is like, this is the real game.
Yeah, we were definitely ready. We're chomping at the bit to go do it. So I think that's like, what is ready? What's your level of ready? You can rehearse them a million times in your head, and you can do stuff, but on initial contact, it won't survive. But then also the training. But then it's also the spirit and the intent of like, hey, camaraderie, esprit de corps. Hey, what do you guys want to do? And that. My team was really awesome. And then working with the 148 battery guys, they were really good too. So we were definitely ready. We did a couple rehearsals, so we knew how to communicate, what we were going to communicate on, and stuff like that. One of the other problems we had was, single channel communications. Traditionally we'd had multiple frequencies, meaning is that we had a SALT, SALT channel, supporting as arms liaison channel, which is VHF, usually because we're in VHF range in support of a company. But then also too is we had an HF frequency, which we could talk back to the SALT, and then also back to the brigade, and then on to the division team. Some of them were encrypted, some of them weren't. We had what's called a KL-43, a little box that was, generate messages. It sounded like a fax across the radio, so we could send all these messages. And that was also really effective for longer distances. So, like I said, we went out there, we're like, hey, what's the Anglico command channel? What? And so, like a lot of the traditional frequencies, a lot of that tribal knowledge was lost with the transition to MLE. And then, hey, we need HF frequencies, we need, VHF frequencies. If we're out of range, we need to be able to talk to somebody. Hey, you may be able to talk to the brigade team and the division team. I can't talk to you, but I can talk back to the brigade team, and they would pass messages. So, the traditional linear pattern of communications from the FIC, SALT, brigade team, and then to the division team was thing. Sometimes because of proximity and or communications, sometimes you're talking straight to the division team, and then they were passing information to the SALT, just because of the way frequencies and channels and communications worked out.
Because that's how the real world is. It's not all the easy training, where everything's kind of set up to succeed and stuff like that. Yeah, it's I think HF communication was coming back around as a more important asset. Like, people were starting to realize how important of an asset it was, on my way out the door. I don't think it was ever lost on the people like, snipers or recon guys or even Anglico guys, how important it was. But I think it was starting to become like, oh man, this is a capability that our radio operators should be, very well spun up on. They should understand how to do this, because we were shooting, the one we always talked about was Flores he set up a field expedient antenna and did an unamplified HF shot from Idaho back to Camp Pendleton, and it's like, cool, man, and that's what we want. That's what we want to hear, is that our radio operators can make these things happen, because, when the shit hits the fan and something goes down, we got to talk somehow, because what good are we as observers and stuff like that if we can't get a hold of the fire support assets or higher up and stuff. For you, like, for the invasion, was it pretty active on the British side? I haven't really talked to anybody that was involved with the British part of the invasion. So
for 2003, like I said, one of the other things, the A team and the B team, for quality spread was critical. A lot of the headquarters guys stayed with the headquarters, and they actually went with 3rd ID all the way up to Baghdad. And some of them did really, really well for themselves because they had been to the ABC course and stuff like that. So we had all of the headquarters guys actually, they were the real heroes, because they actually went all the way marching to Baghdad with 3rd ID. And then for us, for the initial invasion, was Basra, and that was the initial invasion. They were going to take the Afwa Peninsula, secure that area, and then move up north and stuff like that. So we invaded about 2 days before the actual invasion. One of the great things was to see all the missiles in the sky streaking across the sky to hit their targets, the shock and awe, all of the missiles that were simultaneously hit all of their targets. So it was pretty awesome.
That's I've said it multiple times on here. It's like it's an experience that, it's one of those things that's going to be in the history books, right? Like, we invaded another country, we toppled an army or whatever, and you got to take part in that. We can debate the politics of it, if it even should have happened or not, whatever. It happened, and you were part of that. So how do you feel now, being able to say, like, hey, I took part in this as like an invading force into another country?
So one of the things that was justified or unjustified was the prospects of weapons of mass destruction. So again, a lot of experts, articulate that there wasn't. Why did we invade? I think it was a spanking that was overdue. If you notice the history between the weapons of mass destruction, a lot of them weren't destroyed during the war. A lot of them were still there after the war. And then the UN inspectors went in there for like a year, 2 years after the war to look at all these sites and then designate them and then go there and destroy the weapons and the capabilities. When you invaded the second time, it was based on a United Nations resolution, the politics behind, hey, did he have or didn't he have? He definitely had all the parts and pieces, and he definitely threatened the world. And when we invaded, we took it as, hey, this is a real threat, whether it was perceived or reality. I didn't really care. That's not my level of expertise. But I will tell you, there was lots of parts and pieces, the remnants, how he brought those all together with his expertise was questionable. One of the biggest things people don't realize is that the first Gulf War, there was actually Soviet advisors. There was probably about 80,000 Soviet and Eastern Bloc advisors. So this big military machine that he was using against Iran was all subsidized by the former Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc countries. When we went to the resolution in 2003, it was on the premise of weapons of mass destruction. At the end of the day, I didn't see any. There wasn't any. But definitely the parts and pieces were all there, and he definitely threatened the world with that. Real or perceived, that's up to you. I'm not going to debate that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there was a lot of stuff that he had that he shouldn't have had, but bringing it all together to actually create the threat that he was actually articulating was questionable.
Yeah. I had never heard that about the advisors in the Gulf War. That's something that
So go back and look at your history. 1991, 90, when Kuwait actually the Iraqis invaded Kuwait. The big ally of Iraq was the former Soviet Union. The Cold War was over. The Soviet Union couldn't support them in the manner that they will, because essentially the Soviet Union had collapsed as we know it when the Berlin Wall came down. There was about 80,000 advisors there. So, like, for instance, if you went up to Al-Assad, I don't know if you've been there, they have a huge base there. And if you look at it, everything still has the Cyrillic writing on it, the Russian writing on it, and it's fully nuclear capable, fully integrated. We had MiG-29s in there right now. The Iraqis couldn't have supported and sustained that, but there was advisors there doing that for a long time. And when we invaded, the binding resolution was agreed with the Soviet Union, and then the United Nations and the United States paid for a lot of these advisors to evacuate from Iraq. And that was one of the constituency. The perception was just like Vietnam, when we had advisors in North Vietnam, that we didn't want to create hostilities with the Soviet Union for bombing the Soviet ships in the Haiphong harbor. Same kind of people were in that strategic mind sense in 1991. And there were still some advisors there that just kind of were expats and that were there in Iraq just living because it was better to live there and they could have a salary. So I met a bunch of guys that were like Hungarian and Czechoslovakian. I'm like, what are you doing here, dude?
Yeah.
And they were kind of like, oh, I've been here for 20 years. It's awesome. So 2003, when we invaded, the binding resolution came out of the United Nations, and it was on the premise of weapons of mass destruction. At the end of the day, there or not there, not for me to debate, but I can tell you from personal experience, there was lots of parts and pieces that were still there and that he shouldn't have had.
Yeah, for sure. So after you guys came back from this first ANGLICO deployment, this is like, we're getting the active duty guys back out there and doing their thing. What was the perception within the higher commands of now, hey, how the ANGLICO unit did, for this invasion?
For the most part, like, we were successful. We did something with nothing. I mean, we probably had about 150 people out there supporting 40 and 42 Commando. We had about another 50 supporting the 3rd ID. So there was a lot of, success, and they realized that, hey, without us, they wouldn't have done the things that they could do. RCT-7 that was up there, our division team had constant communications with them via FATIDs and stuff like that. So a lot of stuff like that was important. So the perception was, hey, you guys did a lot of great work. We're bringing you back. We came back in May, and then July we had the ceremony, and then October they had the ceremony at First Anglico, and then we started piecemealing the unit together, started looking at TOTEs, and we pretty much had carte blanche to ask for whatever we wanted within reason. And we were some of the first people to get the PRC 117, which was a multi-band radio, and the PRC 150. A lot of units were still using the old 119s and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that went on for about 3 or 4 years. And then a lot of units got them and didn't have the training, and we were helping them train with that. Hey, this is the way you do this. This is the way you do that. I mean, contractors came out. We had like a 3-week course of how to use that radio from backwards to forwards and stuff like that, to include setting up networks, which is something that people weren't familiar with. Like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do we do this?
Yeah, I remember when the 117 Golf came out, which is the smaller. For those that don't know, the 117 is a backpackable radio. The Golf version of it is basically the same radio but cut in half, and it only takes 1 battery rather than 2, so it's half the weight. So it's a little bit easier to carry around. And I was with 3-6 in Marja, and I was going out on some mission that they had, and I went over to the comm guys like, hey, can I use that 117 Golf that's up on the shelf? And they're like, no, that's for data use only. They're like, they just basically, no, you can't touch it. I'm like, it's literally sitting there collecting dust. You're not using it at all. And because they don't understand the capabilities, or they have that one kind of mindset of what it's supposed to be for, what it's used for, I had to carry my big ass heavy radio rather than that one. And I'm like, dude, you guys, like, come on, man. You have this new technology and it's sitting on a shelf, not plugged into anything, like just collecting dust. Let us use this fucking stuff. So that's funny. When you bring in new stuff like that, you definitely have to have someone come out and show people its capabilities. Because if not, it doesn't get used in the capacity that it was built for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when the contractors came out for the 117, I mean, the course was very comprehensive. There was all the single channel VHF, UHF satellite that was covered. But then when they started talking about networks, people started falling asleep. And then that's when I kind of like, wait a second, this is a lot more capable than we were using it for. So that was another thing, changing out the TOTE, having 2 of those in a FIC team, and then a PRC 150, and then a 148, which is a small handheld. And like, hey, what were the radios that we needed? And my going into it was, everybody should have a radio. Everybody should have a radio that's big and it's multi-channel, multi-band, and we should be able to talk in and out of the spectrum. But again, we had somebody who thought, hey, that fire control team needs a SAW, ditch the radio. And I'm like, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah. Well, that was. I mean, even up until the point I was there, that the junior guy was carrying a SAW on the firepower control teams.
Yeah, and it realizes like the employment of that weapon. If you were in a FIC team, it should have probably been the fire. There was the fire control team chief, which is a sergeant 0861. Well, the next senior guy should have been holding that, not the junior guy, because you have to employ that weapon at a moment's notice without any type of instruction. It's really instinctual that hey, where do you move with the FIC team if you're actually in contact with that weapon? And it's not like something you pass off to the junior guy who's, hey, here you go, here's your weapon, because you just got here. It should be more like, hey, who's the second most senior guy in the team? Hey, I need you to go here, here, and here if this happens, employ this weapon. And that was one of the shortcomings of that weapon. I always saw it when it was being employed. It's like, oh my God, you're like yelling at the guy, hey, go maneuver here, and like, where? And the guy was just shooting it sometimes and couldn't see where he was, suppressing fires and stuff like that. So I would argue against that. We had those at the SALT team previously, the Sporting Arms Liaison team, but we didn't have them down at the FICS. We had usually had 2 203s and two long guns, and then the officer carried a pistol. But then after the war kicked off, hey, he had a pistol and a rifle.
Yeah.
So a lot of that TOTE changed.
So that was my next question, was going to be how. So after that invasion, what changed after you came back? How did you guys adjust your training and kind of how your layout of your teams?
So the biggest thing was, hey, what was the old frequencies, going back to that HF command, and then being fluid, on those radios, and then being fluid on those radios on more than one frequency. Traditionally the SALT radio was VHF because, hey, a SALT team was in command of 2 FIC teams supporting a battalion, right? So there was really looking into that. And then the other part about was networking. It was the beginning of that. And then looking at that, hey, with the division team, we needed a capability to talk FATIDs. The guy with the thick rim glasses who chewed bubble gum and was the dungeon master level 5 was now the division team, and he was the only person talking VF FATIDs with the EPLRs, and it was like a godsend. But you needed that guy. Having that networking capability as we transition from old radios to networking, and that's kind of where we're at now. Is like, hey, it's one thing to talk via radio, but now you will send data across radios, and having that network capability, being able to plug in greenside tactical radios to a network will be critical for support and sustain after, ANGLICO goes to the future. So that was kind of the dawn of that, understanding, hey, we need FATIDs. And before, traditionally, we said, no, we don't need it. But now we realize we needed it, so we got a lot of those FATIDs. And I think we had one all the way down to SALT team and that capability.
Yeah, for those that may not know what we're talking about, the FATIDs is the artillery computer system where you process fire missions and you get digital approval and all that stuff through it. It's just like you said, moving away from voice communications to digital communication, setting up those networks and stuff like that. What's your thoughts? I always hated it. The worst thing that could happen to a new 0861 is making them an FATIDs operator. And when they become good at it and everyone finds out, that becomes their life. They no longer are the guy that gets to go out and do call for fire on the OP and stuff, because every ops chief and every fires chief is like, I'm not giving up this dude who knows this computer system inside and out. Because it's not a normal computer system. It's not like your data guys can come down and work on your computer system. More than likely, they'll fuck it up if they do anything with it. But you expect this artillery observer to come in and learn about, subnet mask and IP addresses and, and all this whatever, all this different stuff. And do you really believe that it's sustainable to have a guy that's an 0861 do that and be able to do the observer stuff? Or do you think, I personally think it should be split. I think it should be a split MOS, that you're either like a ops chief kind of guy and you become a FATIDs person and you just stick on networking and systems and stuff because you become very good at that, or you're on the other side and you're an observer in the field doing that side of the house. I don't feel like I think if you try to do both, then you're I mean, think about it. If you're a new 0861 and I send you to the regimental, let's say you go to 10th Marine Regiment to become an FATIDs operator as a PFC, and you do that for 3 years, and you're probably a corporal, maybe looking at sergeant, and you've probably had very little time on the OP, out there doing actual call for fire. This doesn't seem like a good idea. What do you think?
Well, as we transition more and more to data and information from data, now we have all of our operations via data. Being smart and having both feet in fires and non-kinetic fires is huge. And the guys, I've seen a couple guys, colleagues of mine, and they will remain nameless, but they were the dungeon master guys. But when we start transitioning to networking capability, a lot of those guys transition a lot better than, let's say, an old archaic guy like myself who learned on the IFSAS. It was fun and sexy to be a JTAC, and that was what was needed at that time. But now we are transitioning to a different domain, and we're doing in multi-domains. It was always been there. We just never really dealt with it because, for whatever reason, it wasn't fun and sexy to be on FATIDs. It wasn't fun and sexy to do EW, IO, and all that stuff. At one point in time, like about 2 years after the war started, they were going to start training artillerymen to be civil affairs guys as well. So now we're going in different directions and stuff like that. We're becoming more and more digital. And so now you want us to go out and, handshakes and smiles and build bridges, candy bars, soccer balls. And so it was there's multi-domains that we can get involved with. And then the training and support. Essentially, as a 0861, you could be in school for the rest of your life, half of your career just in schools. And then the computers and networking, not fun, not sexy, but you must conceive of it and understand. And that's not something we will laterally pass to the SX. But the multi-domain fire supporter now, going from space all the way down to the kinetic fires and being fluid in that is important. When you and I were there, it was fun and sexy to be a JTAC. It was what was needed at the time. And yes, it did suck for that guy, but if that guy's still around and he's transitioning to data, I would say he's probably way ahead of the cultural curve than you and I. And then one of the things that I wanted to stay on active duty, but I was 55. It was mandatory retirement, was to reinvent myself as a joint interface control officer, JICO, and get into the data a little bit more, and then to overcome my fear of computers. We had a problem just networking via Skype, but once I pulled everything apart and looked at it and was patient and didn't yell and scream with obscenities, I realized this is not really hard. But having that analytical process mind to look at computers is important as a fire supporter, because like you said, you're on your own when you hook up these networks, and that's not something that I would necessarily want to laterally pass to the six. It's one thing that guys program your radios, but what is the strategic CEOI? People say, why do you want to read the COI? It's like 350 papers. I'm like, well, guess what? Now you're going to understand, if you don't have comms, hey, this is what you're supposed to do in a no comm situation. Hey, you want to have this color flare for this color flare for that. You need to know that. And then look at all the nets and then say, hey, I tell you what, why don't we program this, this, and this in that radio and or in that computer to talk fluidly to other people. And again, that's the ANGLICO mission. Cleared hot is fun. It's sexy. It's what we do. And it gets all of the praise. But having that fluid communications umbrella, and now it's transitioning to data, is going to be huge. But it like you said, it just sucks for a guy to go 3 years in the first 3 years in the Marine Corps and be a 0861 and, be Dungeon Master level 5, because he knows how to do the FA TIDs.
Yeah.
So,
oh man, I got green gumballs. Sweet.
Yes. Fire mission, and then towards the end, I started learning more and more about computers and more about IP networks, and then more and more about IP networks into the 117 Gulf. And I was like, okay, hey, we can do data, but again, it's something that's a comprehensive S3 and communications. They allot the frequencies. We allot, hey, these are the IPs we want. This is the spacing and everything else. But we do the initial programming, and then the fluid information exchange for operations is critical. And then realize too is now, like, unlike when you were coming up and I was coming up, just talking to the SALT isn't good enough. Just talking to the aircraft isn't good enough. Now with a data network, we can go all the way to outer space and or another agency and talk to them in CONUS if they're giving us information, and have that timely and accurate, which is going to be a huge transition for fires guys.
Yeah, it's a weird world. I still talk to like Paul Smith, who's plugged in because he's now an FSR. I talk to some of the guys that are still active duty, and digital comms. It's the usage of it and the ability of it is definitely shifting. We were fighting through AFATIDs and strike links and all this other stuff, and now everything's becoming a lot smaller, a lot more capable, a lot easier to integrate. Systems are being built purposefully to integrate, whereas I think when we were kind of dealing with it, we were forcing stuff to integrate into these digital systems as almost as an afterthought. I will say that because of all of this stuff, it just adds on to why being an 0861 is like one of the cooler jobs, because you just get this it doesn't sound cool, but like getting that experience and learning about networking and, digital comms, like you said, working with IP addresses and subnet mask and all this other stuff, it expands your understanding of that whole landscape, and that's just one of many things that we get to do. We get to do that. We also get to go do land nav. We also get to do call for fire. We also get to go, meet with the air wing and drop bombs and sit down and discuss how we did with the pilots. It's like you get touched from all the different parts of the Marine Corps. You just get all these different experiences, which again, being a FATEDS operator is kind of lame in my opinion, but it's just another experience that you get, as an 0861. I lap moved and came in as a sergeant, and I remember Gunny Klein at the time was like, "What do you think you're going to do here?" And I'm like, I think I'm going to be the liaison between the artillery and the infantry, call for fire and stuff and whatever. And he's like, yeah, that's cool. That's a Lance Corporal's job. You're a sergeant. You need to start learning the fucking AFATIDs because you're going to be a fires chief. And I was like, oh, no, the horror. I got to sit down and learn this computer program. And then had Mr. McIntyre come down and, make you feel like a moron because you've been sitting there for a couple hours trying to figure out an issue, and he's like, "Wait, did you try this?" And you're like, "Oh, god damn it," I don't know.
So yeah, being, like I said, being that dungeon master is critical, and then understanding systems and stuff like that. And I think we do a really poor job at it in the Marine Corps, and we need to do more training. But then also too is like, as a 0861, you can do other things, targeting.
Mm-hmm.
I went to a course, Joint Air Operations. I went to JFC, Joint Fire Controller course. So there was lots of other things, like for that Joint Fire course in Nellis. At one time when we were 0861s and JTACs, they saw them as the proprietor of air, and their TACP class was the only class for Joint Air. And, our TACP classes were for MAGTAF only. You can do your air what you want, but hey, if you go to this course now, you can do Joint Air, so you are qualified within a joint standard. The great thing about it is we talk fires and everything's in a purple book, but we come with our service luggage,
Mm-hmm.
Something as simple as FSCL, Fire Support Coordination Line, and then the Air Force calls it a FISL. And the first time I heard that, I was like, what are you talking about? And so, with that purple document, there's lots of, inputs. And one of the great things about ANGLICO was we sorted all of that out. I was at Puerto Rico in 97, and a lot of carrier came over, and they weren't doing MGRS new. They were only doing NADS 27. So all the ANGLICO guys had figured out how to do it in the plugger PSN 11, So it was our little Garmin tracks or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And we figured it out. And then I never forget the air officer running over there to us and saying, "Hey man, you ANGLICO guys got the lat longs and the NADS 27. But we'd figured it out how to do it in the plugger." And that was before we had the vector dagger interface, but we, plotted all the targets in the dagger, and then we could figure out distances. And then what it was from MGRS to NADS. So that was one of the other things you realize within the joint community is why, it's important to all speak the same language,
mm-hmm.
have the same point of reference. But then as an ANGLICO Marine, you were a purple force. Like I said, the origins was JASCO. So people don't realize is that our unit was made up of Army signaler guys, and then people from different places, like the Naval Surface Fire Control Party was from the Navy and the Marine Corps. So we actually had people that would talk on different bands and radios, and back then the spacing was very archaic. You didn't have a multi-band radio. You had a radio that could only talk to tanks. You had a radio that could only talk to infantry. You had a radio that could only talk naval surface fires. But as JASCO, we brought it all together. And that joint assault company, invaded, in World War II, invaded Omaha Beach. They invaded in the Pacific. And then when you look at Korea, and then, of course, then it goes all the way down to Subunit 1 in Vietnam. And then, Urgent Fury, we jumped in with the 82nd Airborne Division. And then Gulf War, when you talk to Leo and Mike Garcia, they were some of the first people that went out. They were at a JRTC with the 82nd Airborne Division. They had a tactical pause for 24 hours. And then 48 hours, they all went back to Fort Polk. And then they got on planes and went straight from Fort Polk straight to the Gulf War. And then they were on the outskirts of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but they were talking via radios. So that was another historical thing that, was huge. And that's the ethos of our culture.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really interesting episode for those that may not have caught that one before. Leo Lozano, who was an ANGLICO Marine, he was the first position that was overrun by Iraqi armor during the Battle of Al-Kafji, which was considered the first battle of the Gulf War. It was like they were sitting there. They had been in different positions along the border, ANGLICO and recon positions, and I think there were some SEALs maybe down the line a little bit, and they were taking turns controlling air, calling for fire and stuff like that if they had targets of opportunity pop up. And then one night the Iraqis tried to take the offensive and push in, and his position was, he said, but they were basically running from armor. Like, it's a really interesting story for those that haven't listened to it. I would go back and check out those episodes with Leo Lozano and Michael Garcia, who could talk about those earlier times at ANGLICO during the Gulf War. Yeah, man, there's a lot of history there, and it's funny. You were talking a minute ago about the MGRS and NADS 27. People that don't know what we're talking, that's all map types, geospatial stuff. Again, another thing that why would we, you touch on in as a 0861, like you learn these different things that a lot of jobs have no idea, when you're talking about land nav and using different maps and stuff. It's just, I don't know. I'm really glad I moved into that MOS because there was just so much stuff. And like you said, there's so much stuff to learn. And like you said, there's so many different courses you could go to, if you wanted to go to schools, there were schools to go to if you had time. Let's be honest, during, let's say 06 to 2013, probably, it was just boom, 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 boom. Guys were deploying. There weren't a lot of schools going on then, especially for the JTACs. But outside of that, there's definitely schools to go to.
Yeah.
Was that, after you came back and you guys started molding the units and getting their feet underneath them, like we've standardized training and stuff for the active duty Anglicos and stuff. Did you feel like, when you were ready to leave the unit, did you feel like they were ready to go? Or was there still more to be done? Was there still...
One of the things that most people don't realize is that whole deployment, there was a lot of continuity, meaning is that people had gone from deployment to deployment to deployment. We were high-fiving in 2005, first Anglico, and then they came back in 2006. They were high-fiving again, and certain things had changed, certain support had changed. But yeah, the unit was ready. We went to a deployment cycle. Hey, everything starts out at baby steps. Hey, make sure your information assurance is done to a PFT, and then hey, now we're looking at an ABC course. Who are going to be our drivers? One of the things we had a problem with when we had driving is old Anglico. We could actually designate drivers. We could actually license them. Well, a lot of that stuff went to the MEF, and we didn't have that ability anymore. And it goes back to, hey, you need to be able to do everything yourself. We had a master sergeant at the unit that could essentially write a chit and said, hey, you are now a incidental operator. You as a motor T guy understand that sometimes incidental operators are really dangerous, especially on the maintenance of vehicles. But we had that ability, so now we had to go back to the MEF and get that ability to license and stuff like that. And then the other thing about it is I realized that there were some people that weren't tall enough to actually drive a vehicle. And then there's some people that, I was the perfect size, so it wasn't bad for me. But anybody past, 5'10" or 6, dude, they were like hunched over the whole time. But that standardized training with weapons training, being able to hike, and then understand, hey, you're going to put 100 pounds on your back. And, oh, by the way, you're going to keep up with Spanish Marines who have 10 pounds on their back. Mm-hmm. And they're going to look at you like, hey, why are you slowing down? Here you go, man. Put this on for about 10 minutes. And realize, hey, but with that, that was the sustainment training. And then the radios were critical. I can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny you say that. Chris Walker, his team, when I was at First Anglico, his firepower control team got tasked with, what's that exercise with the Japanese? There's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they had the exercise here at Camp Pendleton with the Japanese forces, and the Anglico teams get attached to them to, integrate with their fire support and stuff like that. And he's like, dude, we were on San Clemente Island, which is an island off the coast of California, for those that don't know. And he's like, these guys are doing these like 2 to 3 kilometer like bonsai charges. He's like, I couldn't believe it. Like, it was literally what it was. They're all basically online running across the island. And we're trying to keep up with they're wearing plate carriers and their gear and the radios and everything else. And these are all these little Japanese soldiers that are wearing none of that stuff, and they're just running, and all the Anglico guys are just like, oh man, running, just trying to keep up with them. And then he's like, then there was no water. They had no water set up or anything like that, so then everybody's like dying out there. But yeah, he's talking about having to move with other forces with no gear on. That's true. That's literally it, because we are... Our industrial military complex, are really good about finding 100 pounds of lightweight gear for us to wear, so that you can move around all bulky and shit. Even though it's lightweight gear, you're still carrying 100 pounds of it. It's just sometimes it's a little out of control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was always fun with our allied coalition partners. Like I said, just to see some of the bizarre stuff that they did and stuff like that. So it was always funny. And it was probably one of the greatest things about Anglico is to see somebody from a different country to understand, hey, this is what they look at. And remember, too, is that was historic, too. That was like the first time the Japanese had gone abroad. And then constitutionally, they were not allowed to spend more than 3% on GDP on the military. So it's a Japanese defense force. So now it's transitioning from a defense force to an offensive force, stuff like that. And like I said, in the Pacific, particularly Fifth Anglico, which is probably one of the Anglicos, I still don't understand why they didn't have them over there all these years. But it's important because we're literally in Okinawa. You're working with all these allied coalition partners all the time. If there's anybody that needs 3 brigade platoons and then all of that equipment and that support, it's definitely Fifth.
Are you saying you don't understand why 5th Anglico didn't come for the exercises in California every year?
No. I understand why they didn't, but First Anglico was there, and that's what they expect. But when they do exercise out in Okinawa, they need to be supporting.
Oh, gotcha.
So here in California, yes, we support them, but every single allied coalition force should know one thing. Oh, there's the Marines, and then there's the Anglico guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
it's always interesting because a lot of Marines don't even know who Anglico is. It's like, so you almost feel like you're always selling yourself. You're almost a salesman. You're like, hey, here's my capabilities. Here's what I bring to the table. Yeah. Because if you me, when I was there, I was assault chief, and we had Captain Watt as the OIC. If he and I didn't sell our capabilities, we were on a MEU for this deployment. So if we didn't sell our capabilities, we weren't getting off ship. It was going to be sitting on ship, sitting in the LFOC, answering phones. So we had to be out there, like, making sure people understood, hey, here's our role in the whole equation. Here's where we're supposed to, be inputted. Also, here's everything else that we bring to the table. When you put us out on the island, or when you put us out on this spot and you say, hey, you're going to be out there for a week, we're going to listen to that, and we're going to bring everything we need for a week. We don't really need anything else from you. And if we do, we're going to let you know way ahead of time so that it's all scheduled out, That self-sustaining was, selling ourselves and being self-sustaining were the 2 huge things that we always just tried to push.
Yeah. And the biggest thing was like, hey, what are you capable of? And then the other part too is like actually living up to what you had sold.
For sure.
So meaning that if you had to have a radio up 24/7 on MEU command, that's what you did. So like, hey, those guys are always there. They're always doing radio checks. They're always sending us data information. So that was critical, and I can't emphasize that enough. So and then the MEU commander knowing what you're capable of, and then the MEU OPSO, and that's important for the CO to go over there and make sure there's a gentleman's agreement that I'm actually giving you 12 guys, and when I give you 12 guys, they're not to be, the future operations officer or another fire support chief or anything like that. This is what they do. I remember one time I went over to one of the MEUs, and it was actually our old CO. He was actually the MEU commander, and he was like, hey, how's it going, Gunny Miller? And it's like, holy smokes, are you coming out? And I was like, no, sir, I'm not, but I'm here on the bequest of the CO to tell your capability. He goes, yeah, I know the capability. Oh, by the way, for at least 2 iterations on the 13th MEU, they did Anglico stuff. And he was like, hey, I direct Anglico to do this because as a former CMI, I know. And he was actually the CO that took from Second Anglico that took off guys off the East Coast MEUs because they weren't doing anything for them.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the smartest things. When I heard they were doing that, I'm like, man, why aren't we doing that? I'm like, this feels like such a waste.
You actually did not have guys on the MEU for the longest time. So one of the things they said, hey, joint operations and exercise Pacific, it was just a headspace and timing for you guys, like actually making the effort to get you over there for an exercise for 3 weeks. And then you guys just, once, the West Coast MEUs floated away, you were out of sight, out of mind. Just to get you guys out there was a huge logistical undertaking. So by headspace and timing, you guys were lucky and they just didn't use you. But then, hey, we need these guys back on the MEU. And so both of us sent guys out the MEU. And then once the Afghanistan and Iraqi deployments, hey, that was fun and sexy to do again, and one of the things we supported.
Yeah, for sure. That was the, I think, Anglico legacy of Afghanistan was the Georgian liaison team missions that they did. That was their major support. That was what most teams went over to do. There were many other teams that got tasked with, task force, whatever, going and supporting those guys to do whatever they're doing. But I don't know. I think an Anglico team or the Anglico legacy in Afghanistan, mostly that's what I can speak about because that's what I know mostly about, is good. Like I think everybody that worked with them had a pretty good sense of, they thought they were professional. They came to work. The guys showed up and did what they were supposed to do. On the Georgian liaison teams, they probably did more than they had to do. It sounds like a lot of times they were falling into infantry roles when they weren't necessarily supposed to be doing that kind of things. And then, being asked to come out with some of these task force, for those that don't know what that's like, SOCOM units that are, made and to go do raids and stuff like that, to be asked to come and support those and then, continue to be asked, meaning that, they obviously did well for themselves out there, is, I think, an awesome testament to the legacy of the different Anglico units and what they've done out there. I know you wanted to keep it around an hour and a half. We're just a little over that. I really appreciate you coming on, Rob, and kind of discussing in detail some of the Anglico history. The people that are listening that may not be Anglico, involved with Anglico or something like that, may have gotten a little lost in the sauce with some of the jargon and stuff. I apologize for that, but I think it's a really good discussion to have, and I think it's really good to have some of these finer points recorded because, like you said, a lot of the history of these different engagements and stuff like that are overarching, like this is what occurred, when in reality there's a lot of little engagements that happen and a lot of people, different units and people involved that should be recognized for that. Before we jump off here, are there any kind of, I don't know, organizations, charities, or anything you want to promote or give a shout out to or anything like that?
The Anglico Association is huge. Just get involved in that. Probably like there's always the Recon and then the MARSOC Association. A lot of people are heavily involved with that. But if you were ever at Anglico, please get involved with that to sustain and support the history and legacy of Anglico. Again, we were supposed to be an hour and a half. We're just a little bit over. It was great. One of the things I learned about, I went to just one more story. I went to PR school, personnel recovery. And we talked about the Lieutenant Colonel Hamilton Bat 21 incident. Mm-hmm. And what most people don't realize is that probably about a third of the Anglico unit was involved in trying and attempting to rescue him. OV-10, Larry Potts, artillery officer, rode in the front of an OV-10, was looking for him. And then ultimately, if you ever read the book and then you ever hear the real story of Bat 21, you realize that Anglico had a big part in that. And then, of course, the Spring Offensive. We were the last unit to leave Vietnam in March of 1973. I want to give a personal shout out to Jane Fonda, who announced this personally and said, hey, all you American units and people that need to come home and against the war. And, oh, by the way, you Angelica units, I published that on the Anglico website. You can actually see it. But she called us Angelica. Which is another thing, too, is a lot of people call us Angelica. But understand those history, and then all of our history from Iraq and the invasion. Like I said, every Marine Corps document I read, every after action says Marines invaded Afwa Peninsula, not who, where, what, and why. And then our whole history in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then our history now in, supporting and sustaining. Cleared hot is fun. But let's look at the aggregate fires and let's look at the data network to support our allied coalition partners and sustain the unit in the future. So that's probably the only plug that I would make. But please get involved with the Anglico Association. If you're out and or still in, there's a lot of great guys there. And some of the stories you'll hear are pretty much, subunit 1. You're like, wow, that's the same stuff we dealt with now. Mm-hmm. What the hell is going on? You see some constants and some trends, and then it's great to trade stories with those guys and see how there's a history and a legacy of Liaison, and there's a history and legacy of the Marine Corps not knowing who we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh man, for sure. If you know any subunit 1 guys that would be willing to come on, I've put it out there a few times, but haven't had anybody reach out to me. I'd love to have a subunit 1 guy. For those that don't know, that's the unit from Anglico that supported the operations in Vietnam during that whole thing, doing different things, working with the Koreans, working with different forces and stuff like that. And I remember, I think it was Charles Watt that sent me a photo from the Pentagon that has a plaque with the first Anglico crest on it that says Anglico was the last unit, I think conventional unit probably, out of Vietnam.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. You just have to go to the Anglico Association and talk to some of those guys. But again, they have great stories.
For
but
sure.
You'll see constants. But then the biggest thing for them, where are we now? Where were we in the past? And you'll see some constants. And then where do we need to go to telescope into the future as a 0861 as a fire support? Cleared hot is fun, but you have so much more to do, and that's a real big emphasis. I learned it the hard way on the way out the door as a senior ranking guy, vice a junior Marine. So I can't emphasize that enough.
Sweet, man. Well, I really appreciate it. For everybody out there, you can check out my Instagram is @formeractionguys and @jkramergraphics. Both of those are my pages. Check those out. My website's jkramergraphics.com. For my Anglico dudes, I also have anglicoshop.com. Yeah, that's how you can support the podcast. And again, Rob Miller, thanks again for coming on the show. And I hope everybody enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.